constantly answering questions, correcting misconceptions, and justifying their identity. But there cannot be a spectrum for the absence of sexual attraction. And if you still don't like it after 100 times with 10 different people, then clearly you're the problem. One single episode can shape how people think about asexuality for years. Society just throws everything into one pot and assumes an ideal combination. Asexuality can actually help people better understand sexuality itself. What comes to mind when you hear the word asexual? If it's something weird or confusing, that might be because for a long time the topic hasn't been taken seriously by the media or society. Instead, it's often been mocked, misunderstood, or completely misrepresented.
Lots of people don't have sex. The only people who don't want it are either sick, dead, or lying.
I'm extremely skeptical that most of the people that claim to be asexual are actually asexual. Most of them are simply just selfish, lonely, depressed people who have chosen asexuality as their identity group to give some meaning to their self-centered existence.
Probably the most ridiculous community is asexual. F off, right?
Happy International Fake Oppression Day to everyone who wants complete strangers to know they don't fancy a shag. Thanks, Joanne. Thanks, buddy.
Comments like these can be generally hurtful to those affected. And even though the portrayal of asexuality has improved over time, there's still a lack of truly in-depth education. A lot of videos only scratch the surface, leaving plenty of room for confusion, especially when it comes to a minority that's already widely misunderstood. That's exactly why I decided to tackle this topic myself and break it down in a way that hopefully won't leave any questions unanswered. Because once you truly grasp what asexuality is, it opens up a whole new world most people don't even realize exists. So whether you've never heard of asexuality, or you've heard the term but aren't quite sure what it means, or you have some assumptions or prejudices, I promise by the end of this video, you won't just understand asexuality, you'll also see relationships in a completely new light. In other words, this topic affects everyone. Please note that the different sections of this video build on one another, so if you jump in halfway, you'll likely miss some important context. Also, while some things might seem trivial at first, they'll probably click into place later. Just think of this video like a movie with a script. Since asexuality can't exist without sexuality itself, to fully understand the former, we first need to talk about sexuality in general. That's why I'll start by breaking down the basic components of human sexuality, which will lay the foundation for everything that follows. From there, I'll introduce two different ways to think about asexuality, each with its own dedicated section. After that, I'll dive into one of the biggest sources of confusion in asexual discourse. Next, I'll explain the so-called split attraction model, my favorite section. Then I'll address some common misconceptions about asexuality and share the opposite perspective, thoughts and experiences from asexual people themselves. Finally, I'll wrap things up with a separate section on asexual representation in film and media, which I briefly mentioned 1 minute ago. By the way, if you don't plan on watching this video in one go, though I hope you do, the best place to pause would be right after the split attraction model section. Everything before that makes up almost 50% of the video and forms a solid unit, which doesn't mean the final 3 sections are any less important. One last thing, you will hear a few terms throughout the video that might be new to you, but don't worry, I'll explain everything as we go. So please join me on this journey and hold off on forming an opinion until the very end. Or if you're not up for a long video, feel free to skip it. For everyone else, let's dive in. Alright, I'll admit this first part is probably the most uncomfortable for me to talk about, but it's absolutely necessary for everything that follows. To start with, it's important to understand that sexuality is made up of several components that can interact with one another, but they don't always have to. The first component is sexual attraction, which is a central part of sexual orientation, because it describes who you're drawn to in a sexual way. This is the one I'll be talking about the most in this video. Then there is sexual drive, also called libido. which refers to a person's general desire for sexual interaction, and sexual arousal, which is the body's physical response to sexual stimuli. Okay, these first three components are probably the ones people confuse the most. So just to be clear, again, they can interact with one another, but they don't have to. For example, you can be physically aroused by external stimuli without automatically feeling sexual drive, because arousal is an unconscious bodily response. It doesn't imply consent or even comfort. The clearest and probably most negative example of this is sexual assault. Just because the body reacts to something doesn't mean the person affected wants it. On the flip side, you might feel the desire for engaging in sexual activity without it being directed at any particular person. Or you might feel sexually attracted to someone in general, but not be aroused by them in a specific situation. So as you can see, these components don't always go hand in hand. Next up is sexual attractiveness or appeal. That's a person's ability to spark someone else's sexual interest simply through their appearance or presence. It's what makes someone get called hot or sexy, and it's basically the flip side of sexual attraction. What else is there? There are sexual fantasies, imagined scenarios involving sexual activity, whether acted upon or not. There's sexual behavior, which can include things like flirting or suggestive comments. Then there's sexual activity itself. Some categorize it under sexual behavior. These are conscious actions through which people live out their sexuality, either with others or alone. The opposite of that would be celibacy or abstinence. We also have three different kinds of attitudes related to sexuality. First, there's our personal comfort level with participating in sexual activity, which can be favorable, indifferent, or repulsed. Then there's the attitude towards sexuality in society. Do you see consensual sexuality as something positive, neutral, or negative? And finally, there's a third layer, someone's overall belief about the role or value of sexuality in human life. Many people don't even relate to this component because it's more of a philosophical stance, with the two extremes being pro-sexual and anti-sexual. So again, these three attitudes are often confused with one another, but they are independent. Okay, there's also reproductive capacity, often equated with the broader term fertility, which describes whether a person's body is able to reproduce. And finally, there are the potential outcomes of sexual activity, like emotional impact, pregnancy, sexually transmitted infections, or nothing at all. Okay, those weren't even all of the components, but they are the key ones. At first glance, you might think, alright, nothing groundbreaking here. It's obvious that one doesn't depend on the other. However, in everyday life, it's actually quite a different story. And that's exactly why asexuality gets misunderstood so often. But now I'm about to change that. Just a heads up, I'll be referring back to these components several times throughout the video. There are two different ways to look at asexuality. People often argue about this, but in my opinion, there's no right or wrong, just different perspectives. You can describe it either as a sexual orientation or as the absence of one. Both interpretations are equally valid, and I'll show you why as we move forward. But before that, I'd like to point out that it's only in the second interpretation, where asexuality is seen as the absence of a sexual orientation, that the term asexuality stands in contrast to, and don't let the word throw you off for now, allosexuality, meaning the presence of one. In other words, the term allosexuality, which most allosexual people have probably never even heard of, is really only needed when it's used in contrast to asexuality. And because it's this second interpretation that tends to cause the most confusion and misconceptions in society, I'll start by explaining asexuality from the perspective of a sexual orientation. As I mentioned at the beginning, the first component, attraction, defines our orientation. But what does that actually mean? At its core, the word orientation simply refers to a direction or a certain type of attraction towards a specific object. So for something to qualify as an orientation, there has to be a clear answer to what the attraction is directed towards. And that what refers to the object of attraction, who or what someone could theoretically feel drawn to. There are several possible categories. However, most of them are considered paraphilic, meaning they aren't socially accepted. The opposite of that is normophilic, socially conventional. For this video, we are only focusing on humans, more specifically on the normophilic aspect of a person's gender. Another possible aspect would be their age. So let's begin with the 5 most common options when it comes to gender. Hetero means being attracted to people of a different gender. Homo means being attracted to people of the same gender. Bi means being attracted to at least 2 genders, usually men and women, since bi literally means 2. Pan means being attracted to people regardless of gender. This includes folks of all identities: binary, non-binary, cis, trans, intersex, and so on. And of course, some people don't feel attracted to anyone at all, and that's where the prefix a comes in. Now, since a also means nothing, it can technically apply to any kind of object, not just gender or even humans at all. Again, a means no attraction to anyone or anything. But if we're sticking specifically to gender as the category, you could think of a as the opposite of pan, since pan implies attraction regardless of gender. Either way, gender doesn't play a role in the attraction, or the lack thereof. Okay, before we move on, just a quick reminder. When I say attraction here, I mean any type of attraction. The specific type doesn't matter. Yet. Because one thing that many people are not aware of is the fact that there are actually different types of attraction. More precisely, they seem to understand it when it's explained explicitly, but in everyday life they still tend to mix them up over and over again. So let's break it down. I'll walk you through the 5 key types of attraction someone could theoretically feel towards the genders we just talked about. First, there's sexual attraction. The presence of this attraction only means that someone wants sexual interaction with someone. Then there's romantic attraction. This attraction means that you're in love with someone or want to enter into a romantic relationship with them, perhaps imagining a shared future together. Next, there's aesthetic attraction. This means you find someone either beautiful or simply enjoy looking at them for other reasons. Someone who loves drawing, for example, might feel the urge to draw that person. Sensual attraction involves the desire for physical contact, such as shaking hands, patting someone on the shoulder, or hugging. It's a form of non-sexual physical touch. And the final type of attraction I'll talk about here is platonic attraction, the strong desire to be friends with someone. Basically, you look at someone and think, wow, I'd love to be friends with them. Okay, the matching slang terms for each type of attraction in the same order are smush, crush, swish, lush, squish. Now, of course, there are even more types of attraction, like emotional, intellectual, social, or spiritual attraction. But in this video, I'll be focusing only on the 5 I just described. And these types of attraction are also independent from one another, meaning they don't have to be linked or occur together. Because another thing that many people are not aware of is the fact that in theory, every possible combination of object and attraction type can exist in nature. So what we're about to do is take all the prefixes from the gender category and pair them with the types of attraction we just talked about. So if we're focusing only on gender, as mentioned earlier, there are theoretically other categories too. These are the combinations that can come up. So in theory, one single person could be, for example, heterosexual, homoromantic, bi-aesthetic, and so on, all at the same time. This is where the split attraction model comes into play, which I'll come back to later. Now let's get a bit more specific again. Of course, most types of attraction don't really play a big role in everyday life. However, when it comes to relationships, like having a boyfriend or a girlfriend, romantic and sexual attraction do matter. After all, society always tends to talk about love and sexuality. And now I've finally gotten to the point I've been building up to this whole time. The term asexual simply means that a person doesn't experience sexual attraction towards anyone or anything. An asexual person doesn't even know what sexual attraction feels like, because they've never felt it. Just think of it this way. If there are people who feel sexual attraction towards only one gender, and people who feel it towards multiple genders, then it only makes sense that there are also people who don't feel sexual attraction towards any gender at all. So where there's only one, only the other, and both, it makes perfect sense that there's also a neither category. And that's really all asexuality means. Nothing more. All the other types of attraction, romantic, aesthetic, and so on, as well as all the other components of sexuality, libido, sexual behavior, sexual attitude, or perceived attractiveness, have nothing, again, nothing to do with asexuality. It is solely about the first component, attraction. More specifically, sexual attraction. And it means not feeling sexually attracted to anyone or anything. And that's the answer to the question of the object. Asexuality is a zero sexual orientation. Things like falling in love, having or not having a libido, choosing to be sexually active or not, wanting kids or having them, having a positive or negative attitude towards sexual activity, all of these can vary just as much among asexual people as they do among heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, or pansexual people. Let's take a 30-year-old heterosexual man as an example. That is, a man who feels sexual attraction towards women. Now, in theory, it's entirely possible that this man has never fallen in love, that he has little or no more libido, that he's never expressed his sexual interest in women, that he's never had any sexual encounters with women, that he's not perceived as sexy, that he is impotent, that he has a negative attitude towards sexual activity, and that he doesn't want children. And the reasons for any of these don't matter. Again, this is just a theoretical example, and of course in real life it's rare for all those things to apply at once. But any of them could apply, and it still wouldn't change the fact that this man is heterosexual, because at its core, heterosexuality is simply a feeling, regardless of what someone does, what their attitude is, or anything else. Okay, that was obviously an extreme example. Let's now take a 40-year-old homosexual man, a man who feels sexual attraction towards other men. Even though this man is sexually attracted to men, he only falls in love with women. In other words, he's also heteroromantic. And because of this, he's had relationships with people of both genders. The relationships with men were sexually fulfilling, but not romantically, and the relationships with women, on the other hand, were romantically fulfilling, but he didn't naturally feel the urge to engage in any sexual activity with them, because the attraction just wasn't there. He has a high libido and satisfies it on its own. He's never shown his sexual interest in men publicly because his culture and religion strongly disapprove of homosexuality. So all his sexual encounters with men happened in secret. Over time, because of that pressure, he developed a negative attitude towards sex in general, and even started hating himself for being homosexual, internalized homophobia. Before all of this happened, though, he was in a romantic relationship with a woman. And despite not feeling sexually attracted to her, he had a child with her, because he genuinely wanted to become a parent. And now, to wrap up this section, let's take the other extreme. Yes, I'm using extreme examples here because they help illustrate the point clearly, especially in educational settings. So let's look at a 35-year-old asexual woman. A woman who doesn't feel sexual attraction towards anyone at all. That means she has no idea what sexual attraction even feels like. Now, in theory, it's totally possible that she's falling in love many times, because being asexual doesn't automatically mean being aromantic. It's also possible that she has a strong libido and satisfies it herself, since it doesn't need to be directed at a specific object. It's even possible that she works as a porn actress, because she's capable of performing certain things without necessarily feeling them herself. She also might have a partner she's slept with regularly to have her 3 children, and this was the most straightforward way to have them. She might be perceived as super sexy by others, even though the concept itself doesn't mean anything to her personally. And last but not least, she might have a very positive attitude towards sexual activity in general, despite the fact that she herself doesn't know what sexual attraction towards other people actually feels like. As you can see, every person is a complex mix, and orientation is only one piece of that puzzle. Okay, so now I've explained asexuality as a sexual orientation, which, to repeat, answers the question of the object of attraction. But that's only the first dimension of attraction. If asexuality is defined as the absence of sexual attraction towards anyone, then it's not just about the object of attraction. There's also a second dimension involved. And that second dimension answers questions like how often, how intense, or in what context. In this video, I'll be referring to all three of those questions under the term frequency. And that's exactly why asexuality is also often described as the absence of a sexual orientation. Makes sense because unlike all other sexual orientations, this one involves a complete lack of attraction, or rather, attraction that never occurs. And that's where things start to get tricky, because in my opinion, this is exactly where most misconceptions and stereotypes come from. But more on that later. Remember, at the beginning of this video, I briefly mentioned the term allosexuality. And that term really only makes sense when it's used as a contrast to asexuality as the absence of a sexual orientation. And that's also how I'll be using the term in this video. So the prefix allo simply refers to the presence of a certain type of attraction. For example, if someone is allosexual, that just means they do experience sexual attraction. They are capable of feeling this type of attraction towards other people under certain circumstances. Again, gender doesn't matter now. So it's just an umbrella term for heterosexual, homosexual, bisexual, and pansexual. If someone is alloromantic, they experience romantic attraction, meaning they're capable of falling in love, for instance. So heteroromantics, homoromantics, biromantics, and panromantics are all alloromantic. If they are alloesthetic, they find other people aesthetically appealing. And the same goes for allosensuality and alloplatonicism. Although, let's be honest, the last three terms are not really used in everyday language. They are mostly theoretical. The opposing terms would be asexuality, aromanticism, and so on. And these describe people who don't experience that particular type of attraction at all. It just never happens for them. Okay, I think by now the principle should be clear. Now, if we take a closer look at this model, specifically the prefixes, you'll notice they can actually be seen as points on a spectrum, with asexuality, aromanticism, and so on the left end, and allosexuality, alloromanticism, etc. on the right. In this case, the prefix a basically means never, while allo stands for something like regularly. By the way, if you're now wondering about hypersexuality, that only refers to sexual drive, not sexual attraction. So back to the main point. Here's a key question. What if someone doesn't fall clearly on either end of the spectrum? What if a certain type of attraction is experienced only rarely, or very weakly, or only under specific circumstances? Well, logically, there must be a gray area in between. And that's where the prefix gray often comes in. Of course, there are no clear lines between gray and allo, but when people talk about this in-between zone, and now I'm zooming into the middle of the spectrum, you will often hear a few specific identities. So let me walk you through them. For example, someone is demi, sexual, romantic, and so on, when they don't usually feel a certain type of attraction, but can if they've already formed a deep bond on another level with someone, like an emotional or intellectual level. So for a demisexual person, a one-night stand might feel completely unnatural.
I really don't understand hookup culture and the idea of just having sex with someone just to have sex with someone and then leaving it after that. If I don't know you, if I don't feel connected to you, what's the point? Like, why am I sharing my body with you? Why are we doing anything physical?
And someone who's demi-romantic would probably answer no to the question, do you believe in love at first sight? At least if they're speaking for themselves. This kind of attraction is often called secondary attraction, because it only happens after some sort of deeper connection. It doesn't mean the connection causes the attraction. No, it's just a precondition for it, a minimum. That's in contrast to primary attraction, which is independent of any deeper bond and can occur right away. even with strangers. So that's more typical for an average allosexual person. Now let's flip it around. Someone who is fray sexual or fray romantic feels a certain type of attraction primarily towards strangers. Once they actually get to know the person, that attraction fades or disappears completely.
Picture somebody you would probably not be attracted to, like your dad, and then picture them flirting with you and insinuating that they would like to engage in sexual relations. That's how I feel when I try to imagine having sex with people I truly love that I've been dating for a long time.
Here are two more identities that are kind of opposites too. If someone is litho, or just lith, they experience attraction only as long as it's not reciprocated. Once they realize the other person feels the same, the attraction fades.
Immer, wenn die Gefühle dann erwidert wurden, dachte ich so, ach Mann, schade, mach's doch nicht kaputt. Anhimmeln. Kennt ihr das? Also quasi romantische Gefühle für jemanden haben, der sie nicht erwidert. Es ist dann schon eher störend, wenn die Gefühle dann doch irgendwann erwidert werden. Die erste, zweite, dritte Einladung zum Date und du denkst dir so, ach ja.
Meanwhile, someone who is recipro works the other way around. They don't feel attraction until they know the other person feels it towards them. No spark beforehand. Very important. All of these gray area identities are completely valid. And of course, we could go much deeper here or add even more identities, but honestly, this video is already packed with a lot of info. The key takeaway for now is simple. When it comes to the frequency of attraction, there are many possible shades between never and regularly. I hope everything's been clear up to this point. So that was the difference between asexuality as a sexual orientation and asexuality as the absence of a sexual orientation. As a summary of the two different ways of looking at asexuality, I now want to point out a few terms and concepts from within the asexual or ace community that, while well intended for the community itself, might actually be causing more confusion than clarity, especially for people who are new to the topic. Let's start by looking at the asexual flag. The color black stands for, listen up, asexuality. Gray represents the gray area we just talked about. White stands for allosexual partners or allies. And purple symbolizes solidarity and community. Now, technically, we could stop at just the black stripe, since it already represents asexuality itself. But then, of course, the whole flag would be just black, which wouldn't give off the most positive vibe. Anyway, it's not really about the colors. The real issue is that asexuality is now often lumped together with gray sexuality. But it doesn't stop here. What started as an exclusive gesture eventually led to the introduction of the so-called asexual spectrum. Again, an asexual spectrum.
Asexuality has a wide spectrum. Some may only experience sexual attraction in very limited circumstances, while some may experience none at all.
Today I'm going to be talking about 5 signs that you might be on the asexual spectrum.
Asexuality exists on a spectrum. We love spectrums.
Okay, I get this comes from a good place. But it's exactly what ends up confusing people even more. Again, asexuality means the absence of sexual attraction. It's zero, not low. And that's the key difference. To better illustrate this, just imagine a dimmable light bulb. Asexuality is the off setting. Allosexuality is the on setting. There is no spectrum for off, because off is just off. It's dark, black, 0%, an absolute state. But there is a spectrum for on, namely from 1% brightness all the way to 100% brightness. That means anything between 1% and 99% is on, just dimmed. And that's exactly what we call the gray area. So gray sexuality is simply a subterm of allosexuality. It describes people who do experience sexual attraction, just rarely or under specific conditions. So whenever people refer to an asexual spectrum, they're actually describing an allosexual spectrum, or more precisely, a gray sexual spectrum. And that's where labels like demi, fray, litho, recipro, and many others belong. Again, if someone rarely experiences sexual attraction, they're at least gray sexual. And if their intention is to communicate that sexual attraction exists on a spectrum and that they fall closer to the lower end, then the more accurate term to establish would be gray sexual spectrum, not asexual spectrum. Of course, not everyone finds it easy to determine whether they experience 0%, 1%, or only under certain conditions sexual attraction. After all, attraction is subjective. But that's not a flaw in the definition itself, because in such cases, it's perfectly valid to express that uncertainty by saying, I'm not sure whether I'm asexual, or I feel almost asexual, without redefining asexuality itself. And yes, you can absolutely be part of the asexual community without referring to an asexual spectrum in educational contexts. Community does not equal spectrum. The reason you might sometimes come across definitions like experiences no or only little sexual attraction is because at some point the community chose to open the door to gray sexual people, especially those closer to the left end of the spectrum, who naturally felt more at home in ace spaces than in allo ones. And that's a good thing, at least in terms of belonging. But when this sense of inclusion gets mixed into educational definitions, things get confusing. As more gray sexual and allosexual voices entered the space, the boundaries around asexuality began to blur, and that has real consequences. It creates the illusion that even asexual people might eventually experience sexual attraction, which encourages potential partners to think that they just need to wait it out or be patient. Over time, this gradually reshaped the public understanding of what asexuality actually means. Ironically, asexuality is actually the most precise of all sexual identities, with no gradation whatsoever. And yet, people have somehow managed to turn it into one of the most misunderstood ones of all. What was once a clearly defined identity, even if not widely known, gradually came to be seen as a vague and misleading concept. And that's how the asexual spectrum was born. Just to be very clear again, all of these gray identities are completely valid, and everyone has the right to use whichever label fits, or none at all. However, saying that asexuality itself is a spectrum undermines the actual meaning of the word and causes so much confusion, which makes education and activism much harder. Today, almost anyone can claim to be somewhere on the spectrum, simply because the range is so wide. Some allosexual or gray sexual people say they are on the asexual spectrum just because they only want it occasionally when they are in a relationship. But the point is, if they feel sexual attraction in those exact moments, even if it's rare, then isn't that more the presence of sexual attraction and therefore not asexual? In the end, this erases those who truly never feel sexual attraction. Instead, we now see so-called asexual spaces filled with discussions about how often people do it with their partners, which completely misses the point. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, asexual people can choose to engage in sexual activity for all kinds of reasons. But if they do it as a result of sexual attraction, no matter how weak or infrequent, then they are not asexual, because A means 0% attraction, not low, not occasional, 0. It doesn't matter if it only happens in long-term relationships or once a year or whatever. It might not be 100% like it is for most allos, but it's still not 0 like it is for asexual people who don't even know what sexual attraction feels like. This whole idea of an asexual spectrum has caused a lot of people to believe they might be asexual just because their level of sexual attraction isn't as high as someone else's. And sadly, the situation would be less problematic if this misunderstanding were only about attraction. But it's not. People also throw other components of sexuality into the mix. But as I said earlier, these other components have nothing to do with asexuality. Imagine you're completely new to the topic and ask an asexual person, or someone informed, what asexuality actually means. At first, they'll probably give you the correct definition. No sexual attraction. But in the very next moment, they might start bringing up other components of sexuality because everyone experiences their asexuality differently. And then suddenly they're talking about a spectrum. Let me ask you this. Does the word spectrum actually help answer your question? No, it doesn't. Because those other components, surprise, can also apply to allosexual people, meaning to anyone. Funny enough, we almost never hear anyone talk about a heterosexual spectrum or a homosexual spectrum. And for good reason. Those terms are clearly defined by attraction to a specific gender. Likewise, asexuality is clearly defined by 0 attraction. There can be a spectrum of different experiences, absolutely. But there cannot be a spectrum for the absence of sexual attraction. So by now, asexuality has been turned into a spectrum not only in terms of attraction, but also in terms of the components of sexuality. However, when it comes to the components of sexuality, it can't be a spectrum because it only concerns attraction. And when it comes to attraction itself, it also can't be a spectrum since asexuality is defined by 0% attraction, not 1 or 2. As a result, we are left with double the confusion. But isn't it in the best interest of the community not just to feel a sense of belonging, but also to be accepted by society? Well, here's the thing. People can only accept what they understand. So as long as the concept of the asexual spectrum continues to be part of external communication, asexuality will remain something that always needs to be explained, constantly. This is counterproductive and creates a vicious cycle that makes things harder for everyone. It prevents both asexual and graysexual people from being properly understood, it undermines awareness efforts, and it confuses those who just want to understand and use the term asexual in everyday life, like any other clearly defined identity. Okay, before I wrap up this section, let me quickly address another common point of confusion. Again, the object of sexual attraction and the frequency of sexual attraction are two different dimensions. Yet I constantly come across online articles where they are simply lumped together. Let's clarify what we already know. From the object perspective, asexuality is the opposite of pansexuality. From the frequency perspective, asexuality is the opposite of allosexuality. What else do we know? Heterosexuality, homosexuality, etc. cannot be grouped with demisexuality, phrasexuality, etc. because heterosexuality and homosexuality refer to the object of sexual attraction, whereas demisexuality or phrasexuality refer only to the frequency of sexual attraction. These labels operate in two different dimensions. That's why the latter are not orientations, but rather additional identities within the broader context of sexual orientation. Asexuality, however, is the only identity that can apply to both dimensions, which is exactly why we can look at it from two different perspectives. When asked, who are you attracted to? The answer is no one. And when asked, how often do you feel sexual attraction? The answer is never. Where the ace community does an excellent job, however, is in spreading awareness of the so-called split attraction model, a concept that offers an entirely new perspective on human relationships. To explain it, let's go back to the different types of attraction. In most cases, when someone falls in love, they also feel sexual attraction towards that person, right? For most people, that's completely normal. It's normal for both types of attraction to be directed towards the same person or the same group of people. And chances are, nature had a reason for that, just like it had a reason for some people not being heterosexual. According to current research, purely romantic attraction and purely sexual attraction affect the brain in different ways and involve different regions of the brain. While these two types of attraction are usually linked, understandably so, some people, like allo-romantic asexuals, experience romantic attraction just like other people, but at the same time feel no desire whatsoever for sexual connection with their partner. Or the other way around.
My name is Nick Hampshire, and welcome back to another episode of Being a Romantic While Not Asexual.
Hi, my name is Jeffrey Lord, and I am a panromantic homosexual.
It was kind of hard for him at first because he is a gay man, and he's not sexually attracted to women, he's sexually attracted to men.
Yep.
And so I was like, okay, well, what else is there? And that's when he came out as panromantic.
I could be in a romantic relationship with pretty much anyone.
Yeah.
I'm only sexually attracted primarily to men. So.
Yeah. And I'm not really sexually attracted to anybody, so it works out.
It works.
We both identify as a homo-romantic asexual, so we are attracted to males, but in a romantic capacity. There is nothing sexual about my attraction to Tom and Tom's attraction to me. As with all other couples as well, we kiss and we cuddle, and that's where it stops.
Not all asexual people identify as aromantic. So, for example, myself, I identify as asexual and biromantic, which means I experience romantic attraction to two or more genders.
I identify as homosexual panromantic. So I'm only sexually attracted to women and females, and then romantically, I'm attracted to pretty much anyone. And I feel like people don't talk about that.
My name is Zoe, and I identify as asexual and aromantic. I just never really felt a connection with someone before on a romantic or sexual level like my friends. I don't plan on dating or pursuing anybody on any level other than platonic. I've never been happier.
As I mentioned earlier, in theory, all combinations of object and type of attraction are possible, just as described in the split attraction model. Maybe you've experienced this yourself. You met someone you simply couldn't take your eyes off, even though you weren't in love or sexually interested. That was purely aesthetic attraction. Or maybe there were people in your life you just deeply wanted to be close friends with. That's platonic attraction. Plain and simple. And yet, many people still mistakenly assume that if someone falls in love, they must also be sexually attracted to the person, want physical closeness, be unable to look away, and feel an urge to be best friends. All at once. Society just throws everything into one pot and assumes an ideal combination. But that's not how it works. And that's exactly why so many young people feel confused and start questioning their own sexuality. Take this example. A young woman isn't sure whether she's really bisexual because she's only ever had male partners, yet she's fallen in love with women, just without being sexually interested in them. To her, that feels confusing. Well, maybe she's not bisexual at all. Maybe she's just heterosexual and homo-romantic, or bi-romantic, not bisexual as society would call it. Here's another example. A man might be sexually attracted to women, but only ever develop romantic feelings for men. In that case, he'd be heterosexual, homo-romantic. Of course, there are asexual people who are also aromantic, meaning both types of attraction are absent. They've never experienced either sexual or romantic attraction. But there are also many asexual people who are alloromantic, meaning they do experience romantic attraction. Common word combinations like heterosexual or homosexual love, making love, love is love, or lover all contain the word love. Yet they are typically used in a sexual context. And, unsurprisingly, they emerged from an allosexual worldview and completely overlooked the existence of the split attraction model. One of the most absurd expressions, and no offense to anyone who uses it, because how would they know, is making love. Think about it. That could imply, not necessarily, but potentially, that if someone doesn't want to sleep with their partner, they don't truly love them.
I think that if you really love each other, you just have to show each other that you love their bodies as well and just tell them.
Everyone knows that when a mommy and a daddy love each other very much, well, you know the rest.
That's where children are supposed to come from, the expression of love.
For some average allosexuals, that's the ultimate proof of love. For others, one has nothing to do with the other. When someone says a person is straight, they usually mean heterosexual, not heteroromantic. There's rarely any distinction made, mainly because for most people, both types of attraction naturally align. As a result, many people don't really differentiate between romantic and sexual attraction. After all, there's no language for it.
There's actually no meaningful distinction between sexual attraction and romantic attraction. The two terms are synonyms.
Or they end up confusing love with sexuality more easily simply because they don't know where the line is. For someone who's both aromantic and asexual, that difference can be hard to grasp too, since they lack an object for both types of attraction. For an alloromantic asexual person, on the other hand, it's often easier to draw a clear line. And that very line looks different for everyone. For some, kissing feels romantic. For others, it's already something sexual and just doesn't appeal to them at all. The fact is, this is where it naturally ends.
In a film, like a rom-com or something like in Love Actually, you've got all of the cute little date stuff, the dancing at a party, the holding hands, the maybe like little peck on a cheek, stuff like that. That is like the romantic attraction. And then as soon as they go back to the person's flat and it starts to get like more intense, that's the sexual attraction. I like the first bit, the dates and the holding hands and just the romantic intimacy, but not the sexual stuff.
So there's a stop here. Whereas for allosexual people, things might go further. For example, an allosexual person might interpret their partner initiating a kiss as a sign that they want more. But if that partner is asexual, this is typically where it ends, at least naturally.
Can we just stay here?
As mentioned, asexual people can still choose to do things for their partner or to have a child. and they might even enjoy it under certain circumstances. But by nature, or for their own sake, they usually don't want that. Just like a heterosexual person wouldn't want to sleep with someone of the same gender. It's simply not in their nature.
I don't feel the same shit as you, Darren. Okay, but you kissed me. I like kissing you, but when it becomes more, I don't get the urge to go any further. And if I do, it's not enjoyable. Okay, well, maybe we can try a way where you would like it.
It would certainly make sense to only use words like straight, gay, etc. without specifying the type of attraction if you're truly confident that both romantic and sexual attraction align. In all other cases, when someone is mixed-oriented, this model can be extremely helpful in clearing up all kinds of misunderstandings. Considering everything we've covered so far, we might start to wonder, could it be that some allosexual people are actually aromantic, especially when you take modern hookup culture into account? A lot of people aren't looking for a relationship at all. They are just looking for sexual partners. And when couples say love is gone after many years together, could it be that it was never romantic love to begin with, but simply sexual attraction misinterpreted as romance? That's possible too. It may sound strange, but asexuality can actually help people better understand sexuality itself. And the difference between romantic and sexual attraction is a great example of that. To start off the second half of this video, I'll address some of the most common misconceptions about asexuality, many of which show that the concept is either not fully understood or simply not taken seriously. Some I've already touched on, others might be new. Let's dive in. Being asexual just means being not sexual. That would imply that other components of sexuality are absent as well. Again, asexuality, by definition, only refers to the first component, sexual attraction. A indicates the absence of an object of this attraction, not the absence of sexuality altogether.
Lots of people they call asexual are not at all, in any definitional sense of the term, really asexual.
In fact, this isn't just about the components of sexuality. It's about the components of sexual experience, because not all components of sexuality involve an experience. So if someone has never experienced any of these four components, then yes, it may be fair to describe them as a non-sexual being. Asexual people, however, can still be sexual beings, as long as they experience at least one of the other three components. And that's exactly where many people fail to make the distinction. Unfortunately, at the time of making this video, there's still no established term for people who fall into that complete absence category, which is why I'd like to suggest the term non-sexual, even if only for the purposes of this video. It might sound casual at first, but I believe it best captures this specific state. By the way, there's another definition of this term, but it's not really established. So, null-sexual people do not perceive certain actions as sexual, because the psychophysiological mechanisms required to experience them that way simply aren't there. Asexuality is the same as abstinence. Abstinence means voluntarily refraining, either completely or temporarily, from certain pleasures. So if there's no need or pleasure to begin with, there's nothing to abstain from. Only those who do experience sexual attraction, allosexual people, can truly be abstinent by consciously choosing not to act on that attraction. That's a choice. Asexuality, on the other hand, is not a choice. It's a zero sexual orientation. If you have a libido, you can't be asexual. This is a classic example of projecting assumptions onto the word asexual that simply aren't true. As I've mentioned several times throughout the video, drive and attraction are two different things. And here are a few analogies I find helpful to illustrate the difference. For drive, I'm hungry. For attraction, I feel like eating vegetables, or fruits, or something else, but something specific. Another one. For drive, I want to dance. For attraction, I only want to dance with you, or only with women, and so on. Again, drive is a general physical urge that isn't directed at any particular person, while attraction is. The two can interact, but they don't have to. So yes, some asexual people do have a libido, while others have a weak one or none at all. By the way, the latter, if the absence is permanent and innate, are then called non-libidoists. And the same goes for every other orientation as well. What someone ultimately does with their libido is entirely individual. If you wear makeup or dress stylishly, you can't be asexual. Believe it or not, some people genuinely enjoy wearing makeup or dressing up as a form of self-expression, without any ulterior motives.
And I just love it, and everyone thinks, why are you wearing sexy outfits from like sexy film stars if you don't want to attract someone's attention? I'm like, oh, I'm doing it for myself.
As mentioned earlier, there's a difference between attractiveness and attraction. Just because someone gives off a certain vibe or has sex appeal doesn't mean they're sexually attracted to others. In fact, how sexy someone is perceived to be comes from others, not from the person themselves. So outward appearance doesn't determine how someone feels on the inside.
I don't think people really believed it until I was already doing my activism and it was printed in Metro newspaper with like the words, "This is what asexual looks like," with a 3-page spread of my face on it. That's when it was like, oh, Yasmin, you just came out. It's like, no, I told you this 5 years ago. You just didn't believe me. But people believe what they read in the newspaper. So that was, I feel like that was when I properly, successfully came out.
Asexual people must be pretty ugly. Or, good-looking people can't possibly be asexual. Alright, let's have a look at some other asexual people from the web.
I'm asexual, but I'm not a virgin. I'm asexual, but I'm not heartless. I'm asexual, but I'm not broken.
I didn't understand that what they were talking about was real. I didn't understand that these things that they wanted to talk about were actually desires that they had.
I'm quite alone and I'm scared to really say to people, look, I am this. But the way you dress for men. That means you must want them in your life.
I just went along with it to sort of have an excuse to get myself out of dealing with that for a while. I don't think everyone else feels the way that I feel.
It's scary to look out in the world and not really see models of how that happened. There were stories of really deep friendships, but there weren't stories of how you built that.
Every time it happened, I knew I wasn't really being me. So I told my friends, and a problem with me was diagnosed.
As I've said multiple times, someone's appearance or how attractive they seem has nothing to do with their sexual orientation. To make that even clearer, let's go to the opposite extreme, with none other than Marilyn Monroe. Wait, what does she have to do with this, you might be thinking? Well, even though we'll never know for sure, and probably never will, some quotes from her personal diaries suggest something, again just a theory, not a confirmed fact, that most people would never expect. Sex is a baffling thing when it doesn't happen. I used to wake up in the morning when I was married and wonder if the whole world was crazy, whooping about sex all the time. It was like hearing all the time that stove polish was the greatest invention on earth. Then it dawned on me that people, other women, were different than me. They could feel things I couldn't. And when I started reading books, I ran into the words frigid, rejected, and lesbian. I wondered if I was all three of those things. A man who had kissed me once had said it was very possible I was a lesbian, because I apparently had no response to males, meaning him. I didn't contradict him because I didn't know what I was. There were times even when I didn't feel human, and times when all I could think of was dying. There was also the sinister fact that a well-made woman had always thrilled me to look at. Why I was a siren, I hadn't the faintest idea. There were no thoughts of sex in my head. I didn't want to be kissed and I didn't dream of being seduced by a duke or a movie star. The truth was that with all my lipstick and mascara and precocious curves, I was as unsensual as a fossil. But I seemed to affect people quite otherwise. But if she truly felt that way, why didn't she live that way? The answer is simple. Because she didn't have a choice. She didn't do her first nude photo shoot out of pure desire, she did it out of financial necessity. Still, society adored the image of the flawless, irresistible Marilyn so much that it mistook the persona for the real person. But those who were truly close to her told a very different story, including her longtime acting coach Natasha Leites, who was reportedly in a relationship with her. She was afraid of giving up all that had made her the sexiest girl, dresses, makeup, movies, because she thought she had nothing to give except sex appeal. In fact, it's interesting because she really hated sex. Marilyn was constantly made to feel by the outside world that her only value lay in her sexual appeal. But on the inside, well, she compared sexuality to stove polish, something completely irrelevant to her. Okay. Of course, some people link this disinterest to her past traumatic experiences. But trauma can only shape one's relationship with sexuality, not one's orientation. In Marilyn's case, it seems she viewed sexuality more as a duty within a relationship rather than something she was naturally interested in herself. Back then, the term asexuality was barely known, so she didn't have the language to describe how she felt. Yet, everything she did describe makes so much sense. Even during her years of marriage, she was confused about what she was, unsure if she might be a lesbian, possibly homoromantic, unsure if she was attracted to anyone at all, and ultimately, she just felt like an outsider. If she'd had a suitable word to express what she was, any indication that there were others like her, perhaps that persistent feeling of not belonging wouldn't have weighed so heavily on her, to the point that it even led her to thoughts of dying. Again, Marilyn Monroe was more of a persona than the actual person behind it. And even if she was not asexual, again, this is pure speculation, not a statement of fact. The point I want to make with this example is that a person's outward appearance, no matter how convincing it may seem, doesn't necessarily reflect their inner relationship with sexuality. Asexual people are emotionless robots. When people first hear the word asexual, many probably picture a socially awkward nerd who doesn't want to be touched in any way, is incapable of feeling love, can't be affectionate towards a partner, or just doesn't care about anyone at all.
I'm asexual, but I'm not a robot.
But let's flip the question. Are straight people emotionless robots when it comes to the same gender? And are gay people emotionless robots when it comes to the opposite gender? Oh, and what about children? Are children emotionless robots just because they don't experience sexual attraction yet? Asexual women are just frigid. Frigidity is an outdated term that used to describe sexual dysfunction in women, regardless of their sexual orientation. Asexuality, on the other hand, is a sexual orientation, or the absence of one. Asexuality is a hormonal disorder. Or, asexual people have a hormonal imbalance.
Something has likely gone awry physiologically. You have an issue that you might try to fix rather than making it into your whole personality.
Oh, right, just like homosexuality is a hormonal disorder too, because those people don't feel sexually attracted to the opposite gender either. You do realize that adding certain hormones doesn't change someone's sexual orientation, right? But this hormone argument only tends to come up when asexuality is defined only as the absence of a sexual orientation. Because when it's defined as a sexual orientation in its own right, the whole check your hormones logic kind of falls apart. After all, no one tells a gay person you should really get your hormone levels checked. Asexuality goes against a natural instinct that every animal has. Or, if everyone were asexual, we wouldn't be able to reproduce and humanity would be in trouble. One, that's probably exactly why not everyone is asexual. Second, you could say the same about homosexuality. Yet here we are. And once again, there are asexual people just like homosexual people who do have children naturally. But in many cases, it's not because they enjoy the act itself, but because they see it more like a medical task to achieve a goal. It's not the only option today, but it is one option.
I've dated a lot of people who are not asexual.
Yeah.
Whenever I do intimate stuff, it's more like kind of like an invasive medical exam. It's not that it's necessarily bad, it's just I feel nothing, so it's kind of awkward. Like if you imagine taking all the emotion out of it, it would feel like a medical exam.
Asexuality is the result of trauma. People don't become heterosexual just because they've had bad experiences with the same gender, and they don't become homosexual because they've had bad experiences with the opposite gender. So why would anyone become asexual because they've had bad experiences with people in general? Sure, a traumatic event might cause someone to lose interest in sexual relationships. For example, there's a term, catosexual, used to describe people who once felt allosexual but lost that feeling due to trauma. It's as if that part of them was taken or cut away by what happened. Still, that doesn't mean their orientation itself has changed, because sexual orientation is innate, and so is asexuality. You can't claim to be asexual if you've never tried it. Okay, so some people say you can't be asexual if you've tried it, while others say you can't know you're asexual if you haven't tried it. Let me use the same analogy again. Imagine you're heterosexual and you've never had a sexual experience with someone of the same gender. How do you know you're heterosexual if you haven't tried it with someone of the same gender? Well, maybe because it's about attraction. And attraction is usually what leads to the act in the first place. So if that attraction isn't there, it's unlikely the act would happen naturally. Makes sense, right? Asexual people are just too young and confused.
You know, this thing is just a phase.
It isn't just a phase.
How old do you have to be to know you're heterosexual? When a 14-year-old boy says he likes a girl, nobody questions it. Yet, when a teen identifies as asexual, something that already takes a lot of self-awareness since it's not widely known, people are very quick to say it's just a phase. Asexual people just haven't found the right person yet. What comes first for heterosexual people? The attraction or the act? After all, you don't become straight after the act. You already feel that attraction before, and that's what leads to the act. Your orientation is based on attraction, not action. And by the way, it also works the other way around. Not everyone who does feel sexual attraction has found the right person, and yet nobody questions whether their orientation is real. Now imagine you're a straight man and I tell you, you know what, you just haven't found the right guy yet. And here's the kicker. People who say this often act like they understand what the word asexual means, because they use it. Yet in the very same breath, they imply that anyone who identifies that way just hasn't found the right person yet. So, does asexuality exist or not? If a relationship with an asexual person doesn't work, it's the asexual person's fault. Well, maybe from the allosexual perspective. But it's kind of like when a gay person, due to religious reasons, is in a relationship with someone of the opposite gender who is straight, and that person later says, it's your fault that our relationship isn't working because you won't sleep with me. Maybe it's not about blame. Maybe it's just that the two people involved have different needs, and no one's really at fault for that. Asexual people can only be in relationships with other asexual people. You do realize that asexuality doesn't automatically equal compatibility, right? People are often in relationships for a wide range of reasons. Heterosexuality isn't a guarantee for compatibility either. If it were, no straight couple would ever break up. And now, let's move on to one of my favorite comments. A non-sexual relationship is just a friendship.
Do you think that you would ever date somebody that was asexual?
Probably no, just because I feel like that's like a component of a relationship. I think that's the difference between like friendship and relationships.
A romantic relationship is your sex relationship. It's the defining feature of a romantic relationship, without which the romantic relationship does not exist.
Intimacy is the only thing that separates a relationship from a friendship. Picture this. You see two people walking down the street holding hands. Then they kiss. Would you call them just friends? Probably not, even though you have no idea whether these two people are doing anything sexual behind closed doors. After all, you don't see it. You just assume so, because for most people, sexual and romantic attraction go hand in hand. Just like how people often forget that not everyone is heterosexual. And again, not all asexual people are aromantic. Some are. Others still want a romantic relationship, just like many allosexual people do. What romantic looks like, though, depends on the individual. Asexual people are missing out on one of the greatest things in life. Okay, that sentence only makes sense if you assume everyone actually wants it in the first place. But when there's no attraction, there's nothing to miss. In the same way, heterosexual people are technically missing out on same-sex experiences. And once again, there are asexual people who do have intercourse for various reasons. And yet, surprise, it still isn't one of the greatest things in their life. No matter how often or with whom they do it. And in some cases, they even end up traumatized by it or depressed. So yeah, forcing your own preferences onto someone else is exactly where things go wrong. Society has this weird checklist. If you're a virgin, you have to try it. If you try it and don't like it, try again. If you still don't like it after the 5th try, it must be the wrong partner. And if you still don't like it after 100 times with 10 different people, then clearly you're the problem. Yeah, sounds really like one of the greatest pleasures in life, doesn't it? Just like bowling. Because bowling is obviously the best thing ever. Hang on, I'll get to that in a few minutes. Asexual people hate allosexual people. Just because someone doesn't know what sexual attraction feels like doesn't mean they want to take it away from others. Yes, they can't personally relate to it, but that doesn't mean they think they are superior to those who experience sexual attraction. They understand that the majority of society feels that way, and they are fine with it. It just doesn't make much sense to them personally. As mentioned before, there are asexual people who are sex favorable, some are just indifferent, and yes, some are repulsed by it. But you can't lump them all into one category. And even those who do dislike it don't go around banning others from doing it. If they did, they could be antisexual. Being antisexual is a philosophical or political stance, not a sexual orientation. I mean, do all gay people hate straight people? Of course not. So there's no need to feel threatened by asexual people. If anything, they're the ones navigating a world where almost everything revolves around sexuality. I just can't relate to asexuality. Are you sure? That would mean that you're sexually attracted to every single person you meet. Since that's probably not the case, you do know what it's like not to feel sexual attraction towards someone. Congratulations! And now just extend that non-attraction to everyone. That's it. That's what asexuality is. Simple, right? Of course, you could also argue that as kids, we were all essentially asexual. But that's kind of like trying to imagine what it was like not to know how to read before starting school. Possible, but not quite the same. That's why the first comparison works better. One more time for clarity. An asexual person does not know what sexual attraction feels like. An allosexual person, on the other hand, is very familiar with what the absence of that feeling is like, even if only in certain cases. So in a way, they've experienced both. Hetero-romantic asexuals are actually just heterosexual people craving attention. Heterosexuality is defined as sexual attraction to the opposite gender, which by definition, asexual people don't experience. So call them whatever you want, it still doesn't make them heterosexual.
Some people will say we're just straight people looking for attention, or we don't have different experiences from someone who's heterosexual, which I would disagree.
Yeah.
I wasn't accepting of myself. I didn't want to be asexual.
Yeah.
It was hard.
Asexual people don't need to talk about asexuality because they don't face discrimination anyway. Actually, that statement contradicts many of the comments I've already addressed. In 2012, when asexuality was even less recognized than it is today, a study found that asexual people were perceived as less human, even by members of other sexual minorities. Why? Simply because they don't experience sexual attraction to anyone. And that alone has led to the question whether asexual people truly belong in the LGBTQIA+ community, despite the letter A. After all, much of the queer conversation revolves around who you are attracted to. So when people hear that acronym, let's be honest, asexual people probably aren't the first to come to mind. So yes, this is absolutely a topic that needs to be discussed. Before I get into specific examples of discrimination, let's talk about the biggest cause behind all of it. Invisibility. The thing is, you usually can't tell someone's sexual orientation just by looking at them. Usually. And the same goes for asexuality. But asexuality is especially invisible for three big reasons. First, there's heteronormativity, the assumption that everyone is straight unless you explicitly say otherwise. Also, there is mononormativity. People in opposite-sex relationships are assumed to be straight, and those in same-sex relationships are assumed to be gay. But one relationship doesn't tell the full story. And then there is allonormativity, the idea that everyone experiences sexual attraction by default. It's baked into media, advertising, and the messages we hear from childhood. Once you're older, you'll start having those feelings. But what if you never do? So while homosexuality is erased by heteronormativity and bisexuality by hetero and mononormativity, asexuality is erased by all three. Think about that for a second. Being written out of the narrative at every level. No wonder so many asexual people feel broken before they even know the word asexuality exists. And now, what does discrimination against asexual people actually look like? Well, sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's very obvious. Here are just a few examples. Tax benefits and legal partnerships. Married couples or those in registered partnerships often receive tax benefits. Okay, and what does that have to do with asexuality? Well, asexual people are statistically less likely to enter these kinds of partnerships, so they are less likely to access those benefits. Fertility treatment. An asexual woman who wants a biological child but doesn't want to have it by natural means may be denied access to fertility treatments, unless there's a medical reason. Once again, society assumes that everyone wants sexual intercourse. If asexual people were never explicitly taught how reproduction works and never exposed to any sexual content, they might genuinely never figure it out. Speaking of teaching, in school, sex education is designed for allosexuals, focusing on protection, safety, and consent. For asexual students, though, it can feel like they are pushed into something that just doesn't fit who they are. If asexuality isn't even mentioned, it can have serious psychological effects. To every school out there, please make asexuality a standard part of sex education. It matters. Coming out as asexual is also a very different experience. While most people understand what homosexual means, asexual people often have to explain their orientation before they can even say, I'm asexual. And usually they end up being walking encyclopedias, constantly answering questions, correcting misconceptions, and justifying their identity. That gets exhausting, and for many, it's enough to keep them from coming out at all. And then finally, there's the most extreme form of discrimination. Conversion therapy. Some would call it real discrimination. In some places, asexuality is still so misunderstood that people are subjected to attempts to fix something that was never broken to begin with. They are dangerous and in worst cases can lead to suicide. The fact that these pseudo-practices still exist shows how deep the stigma runs. Again, asexuality isn't a disorder. It doesn't need to be cured, it needs to be acknowledged. Asexuality is rare. Oh, so that means we should just ignore it, right? That completely contradicts the previous comment. And if it is rare, then that's even more reason to talk about it, because otherwise people won't know it exists. To this day, we only have a handful of studies on how common asexuality actually is. One of the best known examples is a 2004 British survey on sexual behavior, where about 1% of participants reported not feeling sexual attraction to anyone. And even if that number is accurate, that would still mean around 80 million people worldwide. That's almost Germany. But honestly, I'm convinced that the real number must be much higher. And here's why. First, back in 2004, hardly anyone knew what asexuality even meant. And even if people had heard it, they probably associated it with plants or medical conditions. Second, many asexual people, especially alloromantic ones, usually don't realize for a long time that what they are feeling isn't sexual attraction. They might assume they are normal just because they like someone romantically, without knowing there's a distinction. Now combine those 2 points and you get a massive margin of error. People who don't even realize they're asexual are unlikely to self-identify as such in surveys, which means these early numbers likely underestimated the real size of the community. And this all comes back to one core issue. Asexuality is invisible. And when something is invisible, most people won't even consider it as a possibility when trying to understand themselves. As long as society doesn't fully understand or recognize asexuality, there cannot be any representative statistics. Honestly, on a sexual orientation level, I see no reason why asexuality should be way less common than homosexuality or bisexuality. I don't know any asexual person. Or, I've never met an asexual person in real life.
1 to 2% asexual people. That number is higher than I thought.
Yeah, it's not that small when you think about it.
I don't think I've spoken to someone knowing that they're asexual. Maybe I have and I just haven't known. But I don't think I have most asexual people not coming out, which may be the reason why I've never come. Because if the number's that high, I feel like I should have met someone.
Every time you leave your home and go outside and see other people, there's a high chance you also see ace people. You just don't know that they are ace. Asexual people will die out. If asexual people are supposedly going to die out, why only in the future? Why didn't it already happen in the past? And where are all these ace people coming from? Probably mostly from heterosexual people. And the same can be said about homosexual people. Okay, to wrap up this section, here comes another highlight. Asexuality is a problem. Or, I feel sorry for asexual people. Or, thank God I'm not asexual. Unsurprisingly, it's mostly allosexual people who see this as a problem. not asexual people themselves, and that says a lot about projection. But let's turn it around. From an asexual perspective, you could argue that asexuality is actually one of the best traits someone can be born with. What ruins many people's lives? Sexual attraction. What causes the most emotional pain for teenagers? Sexual attraction. I long for this person, but they don't feel the same way. What about cheating? Something that often destroys relationships and even families with children. What about unplanned pregnancies? Sexual frustration, sexual exploitation, harassment, even assault. And what about the burden of lifelong contraception? Or the potential costs that come with it? Or what about the fact that people who don't want children might have to undergo sterilization? Oh, and let's not forget about sexually transmitted infections. Now imagine two asexual people in a relationship. They don't have to deal with any of that.
What is it about being asexual that brings you the most joy?
Just more time to do the things I want to do. I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. I mean, I've seen friends go through just really stressful times and I'm like, that just seems like a lot of work.
I'm asexual and it's f***ing amazing.
So ask yourself, have you ever truly thought about the possible downsides of sexual attraction? Probably not. Because if you had, you wouldn't be claiming that the absence of it is a problem. In this section, I want to share some thoughts I've heard, read, and collected from different asexual people over the years to help give deeper insight into how they see the world. So now it's time to switch perspectives. Just a quick reminder, one asexual person's experience might be completely different from another's, and some of these thoughts come from before someone realized they were asexual. So if you're allosexual, please don't take them personally. Alright, here we go. Asexuality is defined by the absence of something I as an asexual person don't even experience in the first place. Isn't that interesting? Saying that an asexual person is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction only really makes sense from an allosexual point of view. It has meaning for normal people. But what does an internal definition look like? How do you describe yourself from the inside without referencing something that's never existed in your world to begin with? Maybe by saying you just feel incredibly confused or afraid or broken. Let me take it one step further. The same goes for the concept of a sexual experience, which I mentioned half an hour ago. An experience, by definition, implies that something is experienced. Felt, that is. So, if nothing is felt, can it really be called an experience? Again, let's take null-sexual people as an example. They might technically no longer be a virgin, and yet still never have had a sexual experience. So, when they adopt the term sexual experience, simply because they performed a certain act, it ends up feeling like a mislabel. It implies feelings that were never there. So, in a sexual context, the term becomes deeply misleading. And of course, the same applies to other sexual concepts, even the word sexuality itself. For most people, it carries meaning, because it's tied to specific emotions. And these very emotions are the driving motivations for sexual activity, right? If you created a list of all these experiential drivers, it might look something like this. And now imagine a person who cannot check any of these. Not a single one. In this case, what does sexual activity mean to them? Nothing. It feels neutral, empty, or simply meaningless, like any other mundane non-sexual task such as doing the dishes or brushing hair. It's nothing more than a mechanical motion. So when people start throwing their buts and maybes around concepts they've emotionally internalized, they end up projecting feelings that simply don't exist for some people. This results in a kind of subtle, ongoing gaslighting that many of these people face, often for their entire lives. But that's something I'll return to later. I never realized that sexual attraction was something people actually felt. I thought it was just something made up in movies, a complete lie people invented to convince themselves to like it. That's probably the exact same shock an average allosexual person feels when they first learn there are people in the world who don't experience any sexual attraction at all. The key difference? Allosexuals have it easier, because they're the majority. Asexual people, on the other hand, often have to deal with a lot of crap just for existing.
Like most trendy modern identity groups, this one is, for the most part, just a cover for narcissism. It is a coping mechanism to cover up a character flaw, which is narcissism.
While allosexual people automatically assume others experience sexual attraction, I generally assume they don't. And I'm upset when they prove otherwise. I never thought there was something wrong with me. I always assumed everyone else was just exaggerating. Different people have different takes on this. Some people said they thought others were just trying to seem cool and were playing along. And that's probably exactly what allosexual people think about asexuals when they first hear the word asexuality. But again, neither side is broken, neither side is faking. We're just wired differently. Being alone always felt completely normal to me. It wasn't until my friends started complaining that I never dated anyone that I began to question it. When I was a teenager, I acted pretty straight. So when I decided to step away from the whole dating scene in my 20s, my friends thought something must have happened to me, like some kind of trauma. But honestly, I was just bored. Every date felt like a waste of time, texting and calling felt like chores, and physical intimacy felt more like a workout than something enjoyable. Listening to other people's dating stories, I realized I wasn't feeling anything close to what they were describing. I became so disconnected from it that my friends started bringing it up. That's when I began to wonder if I might be asexual, a term everyone's heard but not many really understand. I just don't think about relationships or sexuality in general, unless it's brought up by an external source. That sounds not just asexual but also aromantic. Regarding the former, that workout analogy actually worked quite well. Though, to be fair, some people genuinely enjoy working out and don't have to force themselves. In this case, the author clearly meant workout in a negative sense. So just replace it with any activity you feel obligated to do but actually don't want to. I didn't start thinking I was broken until someone asked if I was gay. People were totally confused when I said I didn't feel sexually attracted to anyone.
You did like boys before?
I was never interested in girls either.
What then?
Nothing.
Everybody is interested in something.
So who do you like?
I don't like anyone.
That's redonkulous. You have to like someone.
Because obviously, if you're not into the opposite gender, then you have to be gay. Makes sense, right? I used to think I was straight, simply because I felt romantic attraction to the opposite gender. Let's face it, when people say straight, they usually mean heterosexual. It wasn't until last year that I truly understood what the word straight actually means when I came across a video about asexuality. That realization hit me hard and made it difficult to accept myself.
What's your deal? I feel like you like me, but you don't like me.
It's always easy to see things through an allosexual lens. Just imagine the word constantly telling you to be physically intimate with people you're just not sexually attracted to. Sounds off, right? But for some, that's the everyday disconnect they live with. I used to think I didn't deserve to fall in love, because I couldn't give people what they were expecting from me. Who would want to date me? In a world that puts this one thing on a pedestal and where participating in it is simply expected, I had to come to terms with the possibility that I might never date or have a committed relationship. Even at a young age, the idea of physical intimacy felt almost impossible to me.
You know, I don't think I'm allowed to be in love.
I never really understood what sexy or hot even meant. If you've never experienced sexual attraction, and most people use those words to describe just that, then of course they don't resonate with you. My first time left me thinking, seriously? That's what all the hype is about?
They aren't going to have that interest in any contact like that. They may do it in the early stage, but you're always going to get the feeling that they're kind of doing it with the same feeling as they would eat lunch. It's just an activity to them, something to do that they know that they're supposed to do. There's no yearning for it. They don't in any way consider it to be special. They don't usually even realize until later that they don't have the same feelings as other people. They think everybody kind of feels like that.
Let me show you 2 short stories by women who gave it a try, only to realize too late that they were asexual. I'm 30, and over the past year, I finally realized that I'm asexual. even though I know that the lack of sexual attraction, without knowing what to call it, had always been a part of me. At the beginning of our relationship, I told my husband that I had very little interest in intimacy. We still had it, mostly because I felt like I had to, for him and for the relationship. So he assumed it wouldn't be an issue in the future. We got married, had a child, and have now been together for 6 years. I have to force myself to be affectionate with him, and it's exhausting. He feels rejected and thinks it's his fault. His needs aren't being met, and now he's cheating on me. I offered him a divorce because I can't accept the cheating, but he refuses to leave me. I, however, don't want physical intimacy anymore. When it happens, it feels so awful, like I'm being violated. I just want it to end. He won't let me leave this marriage, and I feel like we're both trapped. Imagine being expected to sleep with someone you're not sexually attracted to. Theoretically, that's possible. But long term, that's a whole different story. Of course, everyone's different, but if the man had truly understood what it means to be asexual, he probably wouldn't have taken it personally. Here's the second story. I only realized I was an alloromantic asexual after my divorce. At the time, my ex came out as bisexual, but was extremely frustrated that I didn't want to engage in anything sexual with him. I tried to, just to make him happy. But I started to truly hate the act and dreaded the days when we were supposed to do it, and often felt really depressed afterward. After the divorce, I felt liberated from the sexual obligation in my marriage. I don't think I could ever go back to doing that just to please someone else. It also put so much of my college experience into perspective. Many of my friends explored their sexuality in different ways, while I often found myself sitting in rooms with guys who made suggestive comments and kept trying to initiate something with me. It was just so far from my interest that I never responded to it. Looking back, some of those experiences are almost comical. I don't understand the concept of cheating. This sentence can be interpreted in different ways. An asexual person might say this because they don't feel sexual attraction or desire for other people. And if you don't have that feeling, it's hard to grasp how it could be so strong that someone would risk a relationship for it. But it could also be a question about values. Why is cheating such a big deal? And why do people think cheating is worse than things like emotional neglect? This challenges the idea of what really matters in a relationship.
I don't understand cheating. What's the big deal? I've never understood it. I mean, I have multiple friends. Why not have multiple? What's the difference?
I didn't feel like a married woman. I was completely faithful to my overseas husband. But that wasn't because I loved him or even because I had moral ideas. My fidelity was due to my lack of interest in sex. Imagine you and your partner go bowling. The next morning, they want to go bowling again. That afternoon, they ask again. And the next day, they still want to bowl. Sure, bowling can be fun. But come on. Many people say this analogy captures the asexual experience quite well. But I take it even further. Every billboard in town is advertising bowling. And everyone around you keeps saying it's the greatest thing in the world and that you'd be missing out without it. Even though this might reflect the experience of many asexual individuals, it's also important to remember that some are actively repulsed by it. So even bowling is not okay for them. Still, this example shows how absurd things can feel from an asexual point of view. Because allosexual and asexual people often live in completely different worlds. And one last thought. Being asexual feels like being gaslit by the entire world. To put it differently, you feel like the entire world is trying to convince you that something's wrong with you. Again, imagine being heterosexual and people keep telling you it's just a phase, that being attracted to the opposite gender is normal, that you really need to try being with someone of the same gender to fix yourself or to finally understand what it's really about. And so on. I briefly touched on the problem of asexual representation in the introduction of this video, but now I'd like to go into more detail. To start, I'll highlight 6 key terms that, in my view, best describe how asexuality has been portrayed in film and television from the past to the present. Disregard, mockery, erasure, reinterpretation, tokenism, and misrepresentation. Just a quick note, I haven't personally seen most of the films and shows I'm going to talk about. I've only studied them as part of my research. Disregard. For many screenwriters, asexuality is a problem because it's not considered marketable. Stories are often driven by sexual attraction, and asexuality is the opposite of that. But there are so many other ways people can form meaningful connections. Instead of exploring these other dynamics, asexuality is usually ignored, and that makes it invisible. Mockery. When asexual characters do appear, they are often treated as a joke. Even close friends in these shows and movies might say things like, "You just haven't found the right person yet." This frames asexual people as confused, immature, childish, cold, shy, or even as sick or dishonest.
But I'm not immature.
I am immature, don't get me wrong, but like not because I'm asexual.
They're usually non-human characters. Robots, aliens, humanoid things.
It reinforces harmful stereotypes and sends the message that asexuality always needs some kind of explanation, instead of being accepted as a valid identity. Erasure. Erasure can happen gradually or deliberately. For example, a character might initially be portrayed as sexually uninterested, but later seasons rewrite them into a so-called more normal sexuality. In other cases, an asexual character from a book or comic is given a sexual storyline in the screen adaptation. As a result, their original identity is erased, and viewers are led to believe they were never really asexual in the first place. Speaking of viewers, there's something I'd call reinterpretation. What do I mean by that? Even when a character is confirmed to be asexual or can clearly be interpreted that way, many viewers still tend to project allosexual ideas onto them. They start shipping the character with others or assume there's some hidden sexual attraction. For example, as already mentioned, people often think that if someone isn't interested in the opposite gender, they must be homosexual. Or if they show interest in the same gender, it must be their sexual orientation, not romantic orientation. Gay can also mean homoromantic. A man who's interested in other men can still be asexual, as long as those feelings are romantic in nature. These kinds of projections show how rarely asexual identities are shown in pop culture, and how little most viewers are even aware of them. Tokenism. Some shows include an explicitly asexual character just to tick the diversity box, basically saying, "Look, we've got representation." The character might be mentioned or briefly shown, but they are not truly developed or taken seriously. And finally, perhaps the most damaging issue is misrepresentation. This happens when a character either identifies as asexual or is labeled that way by others, even though they are not. Maybe they were lying all along and later turn out to be allosexual, or the term is used incorrectly, again due to a lack of understanding. Since awareness of asexuality is still so limited, writers often misuse the word and twist it to fit whatever narrative they are trying to tell. A well-known example of this is the so-called asexual couple in House, Season 8, Episode 9. At first, both the husband and wife say they are asexual. But by the end of this episode, it turns out that the man's lack of sexual interest was caused by a brain tumor, and the woman admits she was never asexual in the first place. Here are 2 viewer comments that perfectly sum up the problem. I hated this episode. I'm asexual, and this stupid episode has been cited as proof at me by people who think it's not real. I had to do so much damage control just from this fictional drama. Friends, family members, a few of whom to this day still occasionally ask me if I'm getting treatment for my issue. It's patronizing and insulting. Just let me live my life. I found that episode of House so damaging back when I was a baby ace who was just starting to question my reactions to things. When it turned out the guy was ace because he had a brain tumor, I spent a few months actively worrying that I had one too. I've never watched House myself. But when I first learned about that episode, I was furious. What really stunned me was that the creators had publicly stated they wanted to be one of the first mainstream shows to give asexuality a platform. And this is the story they decided to tell? So what impression did it leave? Asexuality is a condition that can be cured. Asexuality isn't a valid orientation. A lack of sexual interest must mean something is wrong. It's okay to be skeptical and ask invasive questions about someone's asexuality. And allosexual people might lie about being asexual to please their partners. Again, asexuality is already severely underrepresented in mainstream media. So when a show finally includes a so-called asexual storyline, especially on such a global scale, it makes a big difference how that story is told. One single episode can shape how people think about asexuality for years. So please show it for what it is, a valid, normal identity. Now let's move on to the other aspect, the characters themselves. I've broken this down into 3 categories: coded characters, confirmed characters, and explicit characters. Let's start with asexually coded characters. So what exactly does that mean? Queer coding refers to the use of stereotypical queer traits in fictional characters without explicitly stating their identity. In this case, we're talking about characters whose behaviors or storylines can be interpreted as asexual, but who have never been officially confirmed as such. So it's not surprising that this is where I found the most examples, because it's just a matter of interpretation. And just a quick reminder, not all of these characters are necessarily aromantic. Some of them are shown in romantic relationships, while others want neither romantic nor sexual involvement. What they all do share, however, is a noticeable lack of interest in sexual relationships, or a distant attitude towards these topics that other characters treat as completely normal. Confirmed characters. These are characters who've been officially confirmed as asexual, either by the creators themselves or through reliable sources. However, their asexuality is not actually addressed or explored within the story itself. And I'll end this video with characters who are explicitly asexual. Not just through subtext, fan interpretation, or confirmation by the creators, but directly within the story itself. These are the ones who actually say they're asexual, or who are openly shown that way in the plot. Thankfully, this kind of representation has increased in recent years, though it's still not as common as it should be. So thank you for joining me on this journey and sticking with it until the end. I hope this video helped open some eyes and encourage people to take this topic more seriously in the future. Or maybe you're asexual yourself and just didn't have a word for it until now. Please consider sharing this video with anyone who might not fully understand asexuality, or who may even have some misconceptions. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of misinformation out there, both online and in everyday conversations, that confuses people more than it helps. And if not for yourself, then maybe for a 16-year-old girl who feels lost and doesn't understand why she's different from everyone else around her. And now, one last time. Asexuality simply means not experiencing sexual attraction. Everything else is individual. Thank you for watching.